Welcome back. So, if you've been following along, I've been rereading the Jack Ryan books, looking for hints on whether or not he was a government asset agent or maybe just getting little helpful hints every now and again. So, we made it up to this one, Clear and Present Danger. Very interesting book. If you read it from the perspective I've been looking at these from. Now, it was set in 1988. So, it was published in 89, set in 88. So, it was kind of written for exactly when the book was released. It's the seventh book in the Jack Ryan universe timeline. It's the fifth book Tom Clancy actually wrote, fourth in the Jack Ryan universe due to Red Storm Rising being with Larry Bond. The book itself deals with when does a crime or a series of crimes rise to the point of being more than a law enforcement problem? When does it raise to a military issue, right? So when does, for instance, the war on drugs become not just a war on drugs, but an actual war on drugs where you call in the Marines, right? You deal with it that way. And because if you think about it, militaries are designed to fight nation states, military on military, not military on civilian. That's not really the way we're supposed to work in this country. Um, the book actually goes a little bit further, and it asks a question. We expect the president of the United States to keep us safe. That's sort of their job. We expect somebody at the top to keep us safe. But that comes with rules, right? So the president has to obey a certain set of rules. And what happens when presidents, in an effort to protect us and do the right thing, go further than they should and start to bend rules? When do you stop, right? Where's that dividing line of enough's enough? And when is the president's, so then what happens when the president's motivation is a crime perpetrated against a friend of his? So he's, let's just say for the sake of argument, somebody comes in and commits a crime and it's against me. The president doesn't care nearly as much as when it's up against somebody that he knows personally, right? So that's a whole different world. How does it look politically? Now, there is a movie that parallels this book with Harrison Ford as Jack Ryan, and it is an amazing transition to the book. But remember, this is a 650-page novel. This is not short, right? This is a long book. So it's a very complex story with some subplots and other things going on that basically did not make the cut for the movie. So if you've seen the movie, you basically have sort of a Cliff Notes version of what's in this book. And Tom Clancy manages to keep a 650-page book as a page turner. You probably could have cut a few pages here and there, but by and large, it reads well. It does have loads of details about the Coast Guard finding a yacht, and which you kind of see in the movie for a brief second, but they gloss over it. The yacht belonged to a friend. The yacht had somebody on it who was laundering money for the cartels, huge piles of money, $600 million plus. And of course, the United States was to seize that. There's political assets to be gained there. How did the cartel get so much money? It lends itself to a lot of interesting political intrigue. Now, this is a Jack Ryan book, but it's the first one, arguably, that Tom Clancy wrote that actually had Mr. Clark playing a substantial role. Mr. Clark is a CIA agent. He's a former Navy SEAL who plays a growing role in some of the other books. He showed up in one other, but this one he plays a more substantial role. And also in this book, Tom Clancy starts to involve special operations. In his previous books, he was known for his Navy sort of abilities to understand what the Navy's doing and put that on paper and get that out and have people understand it. But he introduces a character here. Well, we had John Clark, who was special ops, but we also had now we have Domingo Chavez on top of that, who becomes a recurring character in later books. And he goes into a lot of detail, Clancy does, on special operations to show just how hard these units are trained, how hard they are to compete against if you're actually going to come across one and you're a military or drug dealer. How hard is it to take one of these teams on? And this was in the 80s when this stuff wasn't nearly as well known as it is today. It was known, but you couldn't sit down and Google it, right? You had to kind of know somebody who knew somebody, or go to the library and check out a bunch of books. And it was just a different time, and the teams were not as well formed as they are today, because remember, they came out of sort of World War II and Vietnam, and that was 40 years before. Now it's 80 years in some cases, right? So they're a lot more mature than they were when this book was written. Clancy also gets into a lot of details about how drug cartels work. how are they organized? How do they do things? How does the money get handled? How do they all reach agreements with each other? And something we seem to have forgotten or maybe never learned by the general public is just how strong and powerful these groups are. I know it shows up on the news like, oh, the drug cartels are powerful, we got to stop it. How powerful? Where does their power derive? And Clancy really kind of nails that pretty well. And remember, this book came out in 1989. So if we go back to the, hey, was Clancy an asset agent, or was he just kind of being used by the federal government to do a psyop, or maybe some good PR for things they wanted to do anyway? The book came out in '89. President Reagan left office January of that year, so the book was written while Reagan was still in office. First Lady Nancy Reagan was the spokesperson for the war on drugs, just say no and all that stuff. And Tom Clancy actually met Ronald Reagan in 1985, shortly after the release of Hunt for Red October. So there was a connection in between those two. And the more I read, the more I dug into this book, the more I looked at it like, this is just a sales pitch, really, for using the military to fight drug cartels because they are so crazy powerful. And can you put the FBI, the CIA, and special ops up against drug cartels and reasonably expect to come out with a victory? And that's sort of an interesting question, right? It's sort of a, hey, should we do this? Is this something we should actually allow? And should we just go in full force with it, or should we just kind of keep it as this clandestine thing? And I don't know. It takes people smarter than me to answer that. But the book does come off like a sales pitch for it, so it led me to believe that somebody was whispering in his ear, like, "Hey, Tom, like it would really help us," or "Hey, have you ever thought about a book like this?" And sort of planting ideas and giving him access to some special ops teams and other stuff so that he could write those details, and even the functioning of the cartels and the level of detail he has it. But so he even does go into some detail in the cartel world of what happens if somebody is caught. Like, let's say the FBI picks up a junior cartel member. So do they actually go to prison for a long time, or do they trade information to get out of trouble? Oh, I'll cop to a lesser plea. I'll plea bargain. I'll tell you what you need to know if you only try me for this, or send me to jail for 18 months, or witness protection, right? So is there really a downside in some cases to the cartel? And Clancy goes into great detail about that. And he shows some very frustrated FBI agents when they're dealing with that. And that didn't make the movie, but it was an interesting subplot in the book that really makes you think about what is law enforcement up against. And again, is that ability to turn this into a military thing really much more worthwhile in the case of drug dealers, because there's really not a way to effectively, given the way our legal system works, to really try them and do so properly. At least and get away with it, because they're going to plea bargain to something, and there's always a bigger fish to fry, and you're never going to catch the biggest fish. So it just sort of is unfortunate the way things work. But his intense detail about those powerful drug lords really comes off as almost, like I said, a sales pitch for this. So it really does make me believe that he was having people whisper to him about what could or should, or planting ideas in his head. So I really think he was sort of a commercial version of a sales pitch for a lot of government programs that they wanted to get done. And even though it's, like I said, it is a 650-page book, I probably only could have found 50 pages I would have cut, and maybe made it a little bit shorter, but the book is good. It's a very good read. I really do think, if you haven't read it, is definitely worth the time. You don't need to have read previous Tom Clancy books to read this one and enjoy it. The storylines are independent, so don't worry about that. But I think the big philosophical question this book asks us is, what is war, and when is it okay to act as if we are at war, even if it's not against a nation state? And since 2001, I think that's a question we've had to ask a lot, right? So we've now got war on terror that, okay, we all agreed that was a good idea. It didn't quite go the way we wanted it to in some cases, but hey, now we're declaring war on the southern border, agree or disagree with it. We have Marines on the southern border now. That's as much an immigration thing as it is a drug thing. But is it right? Should we be able to do that? Should we put military in charge of things that are really civilian problems? Because the military is there to protect against military style threats, and it's not a law enforcement group. But I think those lines are becoming more fuzzy as we go through, and I think Tom Clancy in this book really kind of wrote the premise for maybe the sales pitch for making those lines fuzzy, like making the military maybe more of a law enforcement organization with a lot more power than the FBI or local law enforcement has. So I don't know if I agree with whether or not you should use the military in civilian cases. I don't necessarily want to get into that, but I think you can see that if you read this book carefully, you'll see that it really is a sales pitch to kind of blur those lines. And I think some people high up in the government wanted those lines blurred. And I think that's why this book exists. I think he had people whispering to him. I think he had people going, hey, drug trade, you do this, right? Because it was kind of a departure, even for us at the time, to start using those assets to do these things. So Clear and Present Danger, set in 88, written, published in 89. Great book. Next up in the timeline is Sum of All Fears, which is set in 1990 and 91. And I'm going to start reading that one today. But I hope everybody has a great day, whatever day of the week it is when you see this. And remember, Clear and Present Danger, great movie. Parallel the book. Book has a lot more detail. You will not be bored if you read the book and go, oh, I saw that in the movie. A lot more stuff here. So give it a shot. We'll talk to everybody in the next video.